The second of what I'm now forced to conclude will only be 2 episodes for the Intellivision. Starts off with my most recent finding from the console's library, White Water by iMagic from 1983. If the title doesn't give it away already, White Water is a kayaking-themed game combining arcade action and adventure elements. For the most part, you control a kayak with 3 men in it, going down a seemingly never-ending river with hazards aplenty. If you bump into a rock or a cliff or whatever, a man will go overboard, but you can try to paddle back upstream and retrieve the missing member of your crew. The less obvious part of the game is only available in 3 of the 7 game modes available in White Water. This part involves you landing your kayak on shoals, which appear as small white areas. There you can jump off and go search for flags and treasure in the nearby forest area, and try not to get killed. Then you just go back and continue your journey onwards and continue in the same manner until you reach the goal. It took a while for this game to take my notice, since I didn't really get interested in iMagic's catalog until I dug deeper into the Atari 2600 catalog some 10 years ago, give or take a couple of years. I noticed that White Water was an Intellivision exclusive, so unfortunately it escaped my notice in my unique games entries on the blog. These days, White Water is definitely up in my top 5 games for the Intellivision, and certainly my favorite game from iMagic. Highly recommended. The rest of this episode's games can be found from the 3 unique games entries that feature Intellivision games. Links to all 3 entries in the video description if you feel like reading. First, we have a maze action game called Stalker from 1982, which could be considered as one of the first horror games of all time, if barely so. It's really a game of survival. You control a man trapped in a maze with no exits, and you need to pick up guns and kill as many robots, spiders, and bats as you can. The man controls a bit slowly, but happily the enemy bullets fly rather slowly as well, so it's a game of strategy and anticipation more than straight action. There is some progression to be witnessed in Stalker, with faster robots starting to spawn after a while, but there are no clear signs of levels changing as there is in Pac-Man and the like. Speaking of which, Stalker has a reverse Pac-Man feature in that you start from the room in the middle of the screen, which acts as your safe house, where you can return if you must. For some reason, Stalker is one of those most talked of games for the Intellivision, and I do like the game's mood. It's just not exactly a game that would hold your interest for very long in this day and age. It is a good game to having been included in the Evercade's Intellivision collection cartridges, though. From the final stretch of Intellivision's commercial run, we have Hover Force from 1986. This one is a tactical top-down shooter that has the curious distinction of being the only video game ever to utilize the 3D chalk toy glasses, of which I have no idea how they're supposed to be used with the game since I don't have them. Anyway, you control a helicopter from a bird's eye view, and you need to locate enemy helicopters and shoot them down. You're given a radar screen to help locate the remaining enemies, which flash as yellow dots in the radar. It was rather considerate of the game designer to actually give you control of your helicopter even while in the radar screen, but you need to be in the zoomed-in mode to shoot. Controlling the helicopter feels surprisingly realistic, even though it hardly looks like it could be that way. Then again, since it's not exactly a simulation, you only need to worry about flying in the right directions, shoot at things, and eventually land your helicopter when the mission is complete. Oh, that's not all, folks. You also need to put down fires ignited by the terrorists with your water cannon. From the radar, you can locate the fires by their red flashing dots. You also need to keep an eye on your fuel level and get the mission done within this limitation. If your fuel runs out, you crash and it's game over. Hover Force is not without its problems. but then you wouldn't expect a game on a console this old to be perfect in any manner. The aiming crosshair is rarely accurate, and some of the enemy helicopters are very difficult to track down because of the imbalance in your speed and controllability against some of the enemy helicopters. Despite of that, Hover Force is certainly an interesting game on a console that, perhaps at this point in its life, was going far too long on borrowed time. Another highly recommendable game from 1986 is a cutesy Quicks variant of sorts called Duncan's Thin Ice, or just Thin Ice. You play as Duncan the penguin, and the idea is to skate around other penguins, leaving a saw trail behind, and make rectangles so the ice rectangles drops down into the sea, taking the penguins with them. Not very nice of Duncan, but for the sake of argument, let's assume Duncan was a severely bullied little penguin who's now taking revenge. Of course, it could be the other way around too. Thin Ice is actually an insanely difficult game for what it is, thanks to the relentless seal chasing after you, and the slightly less bothersome polar bear, both of which you can also trap in your rectangles. There is a cuteness factor that rivals the penguin games on the MSX, which can be enough to inspire any retro gamer, but the gameplay can be rather brutal. The history of Thin Ice is actually more interesting than the game itself, with the game having originally been developed in 1983 and intended for a 1984 release in connection to the Sarajevo Winter Olympics. The idea was to feature the Olympic mascot Vuchko as the main character, but due to Mattel Electronics' collapse, the tie-in game was cancelled, and the original Duncan version was released by InTV Corporation in 1986. I wrote a small bit about this game in the final Unique Games entry on the blog, and included a link to more interesting reading about the game there. Link for that one also in the video description. Last but certainly not least, we have a pioneer in the genre of survival games, King of the Mountain from 1982. I didn't find about this one until just a few years ago, but it has become one of my favorite Intellivision games. Naturally, it's not a survival game in the sense all these Minecraft variants are nowadays, but the game does have some survival-themed elements about it that might be a bit hard to understand at first, at least without a manual at hand. For the most part, King of the Mountain is an arcade action game where you control a man through a series of pathways going upwards, try to avoid getting hit by falling or rolling boulders, or even by roaming wildlife. What's more is that you need to avoid getting killed by hunger, fatigue, or weather. For this, you need to prepare in the inventory screen before you start climbing. You have to pack some food and water into your backpack, as well as matches, bullets, a tent, and a raft. Some mountains require different amounts of different items, but you do have a limit to how much you are able to carry, so try to keep the baggage at around 50 pounds maximum. It's a game of trial and error at first, but when you figure out the correct combination of items to take with you for each mountain, it becomes more of a battle against the elements. There are small log cabins along the way where you can replenish your inventory as required, but the main trick is to keep track of how long can you go with a certain amount of food and water. From what I've gathered, King of the Mountain isn't one of the easiest games to find for purchase, but if you're not too bothered about playing through emulation, I can easily recommend it as one of the most interesting, perhaps even one of the most important games ever for the Intellivision.